Hello and welcome to today's session on the new features of 2022.1. My name is Nick Savage-Mayday, and what I'm going to be taking you through today is I'm going to be showing you some of the new elements that have been introduced. I'm going to go through banking and payments, looking at the new bank feed features that have been incorporated. We're going to have a look at the distribution and in particular blanket sales orders. Then we're going to have a look at the CRM side of things. So been a few elements that have been improved in terms of duplications and also centering around events, activities and emails and cases. Then we'll have a little look at projects and in particular project quote improvements and progress billing. And then we'll have a little look at field services in terms of contracts. After that, manufacturing and control points. And then lastly, we'll have a look at the mobile side of things and how they've added in new things like workspaces, favorites, KPI tiles. So what we're going to kick off with first is we're going to go and look at the banking side of things. So in terms of the bank feeds, in previous versions, we had the ability to match payments to multiple records. In particular, if I went to this match to invoices, I could actually tick this and select multiple invoices to put that full amount to. Now, what was lacking from that and what they've added into the new release is that it wasn't pulling through credit memos, debit memos. So it means now that I can go through and pick out my 3 invoices in particular, then pick out my credit memo, and it means that that all combines to one and it gives us it linked back to that transaction. Now, the other thing that they've incorporated, which is to do with prepayments, is that for a prepayment, you now have the ability to add in under the entry types, you can add in what we call charges. So charges, you just tick the entry type to say it's a charge, and it means that something the bank may have charged the actual customer and you don't receive the funds for can now be incorporated and it shows up as a deduction charge. Now, what that means in terms of matching is that when we look at the record coming from bank feeds, it's $165, and it matches to the, in this case, payment, the prepayment, and it's matched because it's 165 less the $5, which would have been the original amount was 170. So you've got 165 to match to that. Now, one of the key areas that they've added a bit of improvement to as well is in terms of the auto matching. So the auto matching is a feature where you can just set up rules to say what is my matching ratios, and it means that now from this main process bank transactions area, I can click on one and run the auto match directly from here, or auto match all my accounts. But as it's a process screen, we can add in an automation that means that the bank feeds feed in automatically, and then you can auto match automatically. So you're just left to do the specific entries that need that extra level of focus. So on to the next section, which is to do with the distribution side of things. And we're going to look at, in particular, sales orders. And from the sales order screen, we're going to drill into one of the new features, which is blanket sales orders. So some of you are probably already aware of blanket purchase orders, and this has been pushed into the sales order module now. So we have contract orders, which allows you to go through and set up a blanket order, and it's a different order type. It won't be active straight away. It's just to do with you turn it on and then you can select the numbering sequence for it, and also you select what order type the child orders will be created as. Now, what it means from a blanket point of view is you can set up a blanket order for a customer. You can have an expiration date to say, you know, this runs for a certain amount of time and then it completes. Or you can run it to say when we've fulfilled either a quantitative or an amount, then the order actually completes itself. Now, you can add lines in, and in this case, I've added in 2 lines. And the good thing about this is if I go to line details, I can actually set up a schedule. So 6 monthly increments with customer order numbers of different quantities. And it means that I can then, whenever I go create child orders up the top, it will look at those dates and create individual sales orders in my case for that. I can create shipping documents for it. Now, one thing in particular that's very specific to these lines is we can do ship to location, and it means that I've got a main location and an alternate location. It means that I can actually create 2 separate lines and 2 separate delivery schedules for those lines. So we can have these going to the main, these going to the alternate, and we can set up all of our different settings for those dates. Now, when we run the process, it obviously goes through and generates the child orders, and there is a child orders tab on here, which allows you to then see any subsequent orders that have been raised off the back of that. And if I drilled into that order, it would have a link back to the original blanket order as well. So it's a really powerful feature because it lets you handle those contracts that you've got with your customers, but also it's very good for managing split deliveries across multiple branches and multiple addresses for a certain customer in particular, and it just lets you handle it and set it up from that point of view. Now, the next area I'm going to go into is to do with the CRM, and I'm just going to jump into this marketing module here. Now, what has happened in terms of improvement for the duplicates is that we can now go in and actually change how the duplicates appear and how it actually shows you that. Now, when I talk about duplicates, there's a new area called duplicate validation. So it used to be in the preferences for CRM, but now there's a separate area which allow you to set up duplicate validation for each one of these different types. So if you're converting a lead to an account or checking contacts to accounts, it does these validation and comparison. We've got a validation threshold. You can see up here, email is score weighted 5, but also I can put in there, you know, what is a domain name? It's a domain name. And you can also, and this is something that was previously in there, you can then say whether to warn or block or allow it. Previously, you could only set it up for lead, contact, and account. Now you've got all those different permutations when you're doing the duplications from that point of view. Now, what that means is that when you create a new contact or you run the validation, then it goes through the process of checking everything and it says this is a possible duplicate. And when it does possible duplicate, the tab, which says duplicates, is now being split into 2 different bits. So previously it was just one tab and it showed all different records. And in this case, it shows me that I've got John Jobs in here. And it's highlighted to say this might be the one that is, you know, a duplicate. And if I click on merge, you can now actually go in and say, right, what am I going to merge? So in this case, it's just going to merge the kind of owner of this lead. And I can say, what's my target record? Is it current or duplicate? And then I can tick which relevant owner do I want it to be tagged against when it merges it. Now, if I just jump into another record, just to kind of highlight as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into Johan. And the other element is that records for association is more to do with if you've got a lead, is there a contact or a business account that is associated with this lead? And in a similar kind of vein, it just means that if I go associate, then it now means when I convert it, it'll pull through and update the record based on what I select for my tick boxes. So you can see that obviously it separates it out now, so you can see it a lot easier. Now, that's just in terms of the duplication, what they've added into it. But what I'm going to show you next is in terms of some of the features to do with events and activities, and also to do with emails as well. So from an activity point of view, we can actually, when we create a new event, there's a couple of new elements that have been added in. The first element is that we've got now the ability to set up time zones based on each employee. So it means that if I'm creating a meeting and I'm then sending it to somebody else, then in this case, I'm in Auckland, and it would show up on somebody else's event if they're in Sydney 2 hours prior to that. So it actually incorporates the time zones into the event when it shows up on there when they go into the actual event itself. Now, secondly, and this was one thing that wasn't in there previously, is that we can go in and actually add and link it directly to a contact or a lead. Now, previously, you could only link this to an employee, but now you can link it to contacts or leads. And it means that once you actually link it, you can then send it by clicking on invite or invitable, and it sends off a notification to the actual contact in question. It won't necessarily send in like an Outlook invite or anything like that. It just sends a notification, but it does notify them that there's going to be an event that you've booked in, and you can send that through, and you can put in details if you need to, for something like Teams meetings or whatever it would be. Now, the other thing in terms of our kind of tasks or activities actually is that if I go and create a new note, what you'll find is within events and tasks and activities, there's now the ability to add in user definable fields. So we can set up user definable fields for each of these types of forms. Now, when it comes down to the actual type of activity, there's a little further section that we can do as well. If I click on email, you can see that the user definable field disappears. So based on the type of activity that we're doing, it then triggers to say whether or not we want a user definable field to appear, and then we can actually fill it out within there. So this gives you that extra extendability to use those user definable fields to put against those records. Now, from an email point of view, there's been a few little changes to do with emails. Firstly, if I, say for example, get rid of the email address of the person I'm going to send to, it will actually save it as a draft now. I can actually save that and come back to it if I need to. And you can see in here as well, it's done another thing. So firstly, it saves it as a draft. And so there's a new separate area within emails that's called drafts. So you can go back in and then send it again. But the other thing is that if you don't put a subject in there, it used to error out because you have to put in a subject, but now it just puts in no subject. So you can just simply save it if you need to, because you're just doing something else, and then go back into it at a later date from that point of view. And one last thing, just in terms of these emails as well, is that you do have the ability in an email to select a template. And from a selection of templates, it just means that you can go in and select any kind of notification template, bring that through, and it then just comes straight through into the body of text within the email itself. So it's really kind of allows you to set up those default templates when you're sending emails out based on something. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you in terms of the CRM side of things is to do with the cases. So one thing they've incorporated now is the ability to actually create cases for internal employees. Now, to this, you could go through, and if you wanted to do an internal, you'd have to create a business account as your own company. But now you don't have to put in a business account against it. And you can see that under the contacts bit, we now have contacts, employees, we can select them. In order to kind of trigger this, it's all based around the class ID. And on the class ID itself, you've got this allow selecting employee as case contact. And as soon as you take that, that's what triggers it to be selectable when you drill into it. So just an extra kind of element that was lacking from before. So the next area I'm going to jump into is projects, and in particular, I'm going to jump into project quotes. So the next thing I'm going to go through is to do with the projects, and what they've incorporated within projects now is the ability to generate progress billing based on quantities. So this is really set up within the tasks area. And you can see now they've added in this extra column, which is for this type of task. Is it going to be quantity or is it going to be amount when you're generating the invoice? So what they've incorporated is the ability under revenue budget. You can go through here, and then they've actually added in an extra field, which allows you to go, right, what is the pending invoice quantity? So in this case, I'm doing an hourly basis. So it means that I can put in, well, we've done an extra 20 hours. put in that amount, and then I can generate my invoice based on that. But you can have a mixture. So if I wanted to, I could have for my second line revenue, I could put that as an actual amount under the pending invoice amount, and that would then flow through two separate lines. And when I generate the actual invoice, or if I generate my my pro forma or my claim, you can see in here now as well, it brings through quantity to invoice, and you've got the amount as well to invoice. So again, it gives you that flexibility to choose whatever option you're going to use when you're doing the billing for a project. It's just extending out that element. Onwards to the equipment management, and we're going to just have a quick look at service contracts. So from a service contract point of view, we've added into here the ability to have a new type of expiration. New type of expiration is renewable, and it means that you can set up the duration of it, and it then renews, and there's a new set of routines within the system. So when you do process service contracts, you can actually renew contracts. And what it'll do is it'll create a new contract for you, and it'll put in the renewal date and put in the new expiration date for you as well. Now, subsequent to that, you can also go through and you can actually copy a service contract. So you can just copy an existing service contract and create a new one. So that's a new feature that wasn't in there before. So if you've got the similar kind of contract for somebody else, we can copy it and create it from that side of things. And you can also see as well in here that if you are dealing with a service contract that's about to renew, you can just click on renew and renew it from that. Now, once you've created a contract and you want to send it out, there is a new ability to actually go and send out the forecast and print a quote. Now, what this means is that if I put in a date and put it forward a couple of months, it will then, when I generate it, it'll then pull through a quote that you can send through, and it then shows that this is the time, this is my price and quantity, and then it works out the number of visits and then gives you a total price. It's quite useful for if you're creating a contract, and then you can send it through to the potential prospect, they can sign off on it, and then you can activate the contract and bring it into play. So just gives you that kind of like extra thing that generally needs to be sent out to confirm it before you go ahead with the setup and scheduling of the contract. Now, moving along, I'm going to go into the manufacturing side of things. So from a manufacturing perspective, there's a few things that have been added in. So firstly, from the point of view of our work centres, there's been a new feature which is added, which is called a control point. And a control point essentially means that if we're going through a whole series of processes to do things, then when you're doing your move transactions, it means you can't progress past this control point. So if I wanted to go from 10 to 30 in terms of my processes, I have to go 10 to 20 because that is a control point. We have to make sure that's been done first before we move on to the next bit. So it just means that you can incorporate blockers to make sure that when you're going through things, it might be something like a quality control. It has to be done, and you can't just skip steps from that point of view. Now, also, in terms of scheduling, they've actually incorporated in setup time, move time, finish time, and queue time. So all of these now are showing and included in the scheduler. And previously they weren't. They were just there for a kind of like a costing element, but now they actually do show up in the scheduler as well as separate segments, and it just allows you to kind of like block it out from that point of view. And lastly, one thing, and this is just something to kind of tidy things up. From the point of view of branches, if I just look at this one here, we've now incorporated that branches are tagged to warehouses, but previously branches weren't tagged necessarily to the production orders. So once you create it, you link it to the production order, or it does it for you automatically. And then it means that you only get to see your own production orders within your own branch. And as you imagine, that makes it easier for control of stock and control of what is being done. Now, the last bit I'm going to go into is to do with the mobile application. Now, there's been a few things that have been added into the system for the mobile app. And one of the main things is it's been redesigned, the layout. So they've been made massive improvements in terms of what we call workspaces, things like favorites, recently visited, and incorporation of KPIs. So they've really redesigned it to make it easier for the end user to control what is shown in here and what everything is grouped by. So when we look firstly at something like workspaces, you can see that they've started to set it up to do with the different modules. So similar to what you've got in Advanced, you've got your different modules, and it means that you can go into, say, for example, if I look at my time and expenses, we've got in here a list of all the different functions within time and expenses. And you can see expense receipts, expense claims, tasks, for instance, but also you can see the little plus. So rather than drilling directly into the feature and then having to hit on the plus, you can just click on the plus to do a new expense receipt or a new task. But with expense receipts in particular, you can actually go in and say, create a new one, capture an expense receipt, or select it from the gallery. So they've kind of made it a little bit simpler to just add in things like tasks and events, or just make it simpler to, if I go for CRM, I can create a new lead by just clicking on the plus, and it has a new lead from that point of view. Now you'll also see as well that we've got KPIs. So KPIs can be linked. If I just click on this KPI here, so this shows me, no contact for the last 14 days. Now, the way in which this works is that we can actually edit a KPI list. I can even add a KPI. So I can add a KPI and bring through a generic inquiry and then bring it up as a KPI from that side of things. And from the main screen as well, you've got the similar kind of thing. So from the top, I can add in KPIs. So it's more to do with individual workspaces and ones that really in particular you want to track on a straight away as soon as you log into it. Now, the bit to do with favorites is centered around when you're in. So say, for example, I go back to my sales orders and I look at my sales orders here. Then when I'm in a record and I can see these are my sales orders up the top, I can actually add this screen to my favorites. So if I add that to favorites, it should now, if I go back, they've added it into that list. So again, it's really setting up specifically to deal with what you do on a daily basis and what the individual users do. Now, from a point of view of recently visited, it shows me anything I've been into. So you can kind of go through and, you can even see there John, and I can see all the different kind of cases that we're looking at, the different projects that I was looking at in the system. So it's not just on the app, it's what I was looking at in the system itself. And what you can also do as well is I can search for things now. So if I type in ABC, so ABC should bring up a list of transactions. So it's got sales orders, payments, opportunities. And if I was searching for a expense, for example, if I go to my menu items, I've now got expense claims and receipts. So they've really tried to make it similar to what you've got from the point of view of Advanced in terms of the browser within the app itself. Now, all of this is set up under customization. So you have control over how you set this up for the users, and you can set up your own workspaces as well. You can see that I've got certain ones that are invisible at the moment, but you can see that if I go into something like time and expenses, it's just as simple as setting up the item name. So which screen are we looking at? Then setting up what we want to call it, and then you can bring that into play. And the same thing with, you can add in widgets from dashboards and then flow them through. And as soon as you add them in, it just then shows up within the mobile app itself. So that's all I'm going to go through today, and it is very short and sweet. Now, there is full release notes within the system. So underneath the help, there is actually in here, kind of the release notes and references. You can see what's been released. And one thing to mention as well is there's also a whole section to do with improvements made within dashboards. And there have been some new dashboards added in for different areas. And there's also a little bit to do with multi-base currency for sites. But generally what we say is, if that is something of interest, then please contact a relevant consultant or our implementation team to go through to make sure that that is fit for purpose for your company. So thank you very much for that, and have a good day.